So of course, prior to the Persian Empire, I wanted to go through some of the major powers that really flourished in the Near East right before their period. So here we have a map of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, and they're the Neo-Assyrians because there were Middle and Old Assyrian periods before that. So the Neo-Assyrian period begins in about the 9th century BC, and the Assyrians are basically an empire that has never been seen before. With their military, they are able to mobilize armies that are able to crush resistance very quickly and very effectively. And the Assyrian method of administration was much more powerful than its predecessors had ever been before. And basically this was unprecedented in history. The Assyrians are really the mightiest empire in the world that the world had ever seen up to this point. So here in the dark green, we see the Assyrian Empire in the late 9th century BC. And in that period, we start hearing about Urartu. So there's only one kingdom that can really match the Assyrians militarily. And that's the Urartian kingdom, which is up here in the north. And this map is bad. I don't know why Lake Van is in Assyria, because that's the capital of Urartu. Anyway, the Urartian, their capital is at Tushpa, or Van. In fact, the word Van comes from the Urartian word for their own country, which was Biainili. And the Urartians in the 8th century BC are actually able to eclipse the Assyrian Empire in power for a short time. But in the year 714, 712 or so BC, of course with thousands of years ago dates, you can only be so precise. The Urartian king mysteriously died, probably in anguish after the Assyrians sacked the main Urartian temple here at Musasir. And Urartian power was essentially seriously diminished after this point. Now, basically after that, the Assyrians became extremely powerful. They conquered Egypt for a moment in 671 under King Ashurbanipal. And they controlled parts of Iran, parts of Anatolia, Gilgit, basically the whole Middle East was under their control, except for parts of Urartu. But in the late 7th century BC, there was there's a map of Urartu, and there's a nice Urartian art piece at the Ebony Museum, and that is actually Ebony Fortress. You can still see the paint, some of the remnants of the paint on the walls. It looked better originally, I'm sure. Anyway, in the late 7th century BC, there was a major revolt against the Assyrians by basically everybody in the Middle East, because nobody liked the Assyrians, because the Assyrian public relations was essentially, if you don't obey us, we're going to deport you, we are going to destroy your homes, we're going to send you to inhospitable terrain without any supplies. So the Assyrians were not very nice, leading to an Iranian group, the Medians, coming into play. And under the leadership of the Medians and the Babylonians, who didn't like the Assyrians either, they were kind of more peaceful imperialists. They were able to violently destroy the Assyrian capital at Nineveh, and after that Assyria was essentially wiped out. And then you see here, Media was able to take control of a significant amount of territory, at least according to Greek sources, because you see that giant empire over there. However, we have exactly 0 sources from the Medians themselves. So a lot of this is pretty much conjecture about what happened with the Medians. It can be found in the history of Herodotus, who was the father of history, the first person to write a real history in Greece in the 5th century BC. And he describes the Medians taking all this territory into the center of Anatolia. And there, the Halys River, it's called the Kizil Irmak in Turkish. And we know that they had some sort of treaty with the Lydian kingdom right there in western Anatolia. So that's how much we know about the Medians. We have nothing from them. And in Mesopotamia, the other major empire are the Babylonians. And they're the Neo-Babylonians because there were Middle and Old Babylonian periods, centuries prior to this period. And of course, the most famous king of that empire was Nebuchadnezzar II, Nabucodonosor. You'll hear his name in church about once a year. He gets a bad rep in the Bible. Generally, political leaders who have, of course, Nebuchadnezzar is responsible for deporting the Israelites from Jerusalem and Judah into Babylon and making them prisoner. The Babylonian exile, you might have heard of that. And so, essentially, you'll also see Persia down there. So Persia does have kings in this period, in the early 6th century BC, about 580 or so. However, these kings, Cyrus I and Cambyses I, are subservient to the Medians, who we know nothing about. So therefore, we know nothing about the Persians either, except for what they tell us later. But eventually, there's a king. That's Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel, a scene from the book of Daniel. So then we have Cyrus the Great, who creates the largest and most powerful empire the world had ever seen. Again, I know we've heard that before, but this one really was the most powerful, unprecedented political entity the world had ever seen up to this period. And he began his reign in 559 BC in just Persia. So he just controlled this small little piece over there, and his capital was Pasargadae, so Persepolis was not even founded yet. And we know from Greek sources and Persian sources that Cyrus, he rebelled against the Median king Astyages. They have nice names. Astyages was defeated, so the huge Median Empire became part of Cyrus's empire. And then that left the other major power, the Babylonians, to fight him, and the Babylonians were quickly defeated in a couple of battles, and that actually spelled the end of Mesopotamian power forever, really. The Mesopotamians never created an empire again, which is kind of sad. Anyway, Cyrus conquered the Babylonians. He conquered the Lydians over here, who were the richest kingdom ever. They invented money, actually, so we can thank them for that, the Lydians. They invented coin money. So essentially, Cyrus's empire spans from Afghanistan to all of Anatolia, Turkey today, and Israel down there, the Levant. And of course, we know about Cyrus also from biblical sources, because while other kings like Nebuchadnezzar the Babylonian or Sennacherib the Assyrian, all these political leaders, or Antiochus the Greek, the Seleucid emperor, all these political leaders are basically given a really bad rep in the Old Testament because they were not very nice. However, Cyrus is seen as almost like a gift from God to the Israelites in the Bible. And there's even a passage in Isaiah where, actually, I have it right here. In Isaiah chapter 45, it says, "Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus the Persian, whose right hand I have grasped, to subdue all the nations before him, and to loose the belts of kings, to open doors before him, that gates may not be closed." So that's a pretty big endorsement from the Bible. for Cyrus, and Cyrus has great public relations, especially compared to the Assyrians that everyone hated. Everyone loves Cyrus, and I wish we knew more about Cyrus, but we don't have much from him in particular. But we do have one text from him, and this is in Babylonian Akkadian. It's called the Cyrus Cylinder. You can find translations of it online. And basically, it's what was said in Isaiah, but about the Babylonians. So the Babylonian god Marduk chooses Cyrus to save his country from an inimical king, Nabonidus, who is supposedly a heretic. Though that could be Persian propaganda, but you know, it's hard to say. But anyway, everyone loves Cyrus. He controls essentially the known world. Everyone loves him. The Persians are on top of the world. And after Cyrus, his son Cambyses, or Kambugia in Old Persian, comes to power. And of course, the interesting thing about Cyrus is named Kurush in Old Persian. And Kambugia, his son, is that these names are not Persian. They're probably not Persian. We don't know where these names come from. So, and that mystery has yet to be solved. But anyway, his son, we know about him, not from his own sources again, unfortunately, but from Greek sources and from what his successor Darius has to say about him. And essentially, he seems to have been an unstable person. He buries his servants alive for no particular reason. His most trusted advisors, when they give him honest advice, he threatens to destroy them and their families. So he's kind of a strange person, but he does conquer Egypt. So he gets that, which is of course one of the wealthiest provinces in the world at that point in terms of food production. Though he does also launch campaigns into North Africa. He tried to conquer Tunisia. He tried to conquer Ethiopia. And in fact, they've discovered fields where this lost Persian army is because he failed to do so. And the accounts differ on exactly what happened to him, but he passes away mysteriously. And the person who succeeds him is, oh, this is a nice picture of the Achaemenid Empire. Its provinces that are called satrapies, Shasapala in Old Persian. That's a nice look at how they divided their provinces politically. But anyway, his successor is Bardia. And this slide is blank because that's about how much we know about him. He was a son of Cyrus, so he should have been, you know, a very prominent guy. He's Cambyses' brother, or Kambugia's brother. And in Greek he's called Smerdis, and he reigns maybe a few months. But what happens to him is a long story. So the person who succeeds him is, of course, our favorite guy, Darius I, or Darius in Persian. And he reigns from September 522 to October 486. So we get good records for him. We have lots and lots of records, a tremendous amount of records from Darius. Basically, all we know about his predecessors comes from propaganda created during the reign of this man. And that's a depiction of him from Persepolis, I believe, his palace there. And of course, we also know about him from the testimony of Herodotus, the first historian, the Greek historian I talked about earlier. And basically, Herodotus parrots Darius's propaganda, which means that the Persian propaganda had extended into Greece, into everywhere, and it has infiltrated Herodotus's history book about Darius, essentially. So that's how powerful Darius was. He was the most powerful man in the world, basically. He had the largest empire under his control. And, you know, the question arises, where did he come from? And what happened to Cyrus's son, Bardia, that I mentioned earlier, that we know nothing about? So Darius tries to answer those questions in the Behistun inscription, or Bisotun, in colloquial Farsi, I believe. And it's a very large inscription. It was created in the late 6th century. And so you'll see here the king Darius, and he's standing on Bardia, or at least an impostor. And you see Bardia, his hands are out like this because the king is stepping on him. And these are 9 captive kings, and these are Darius' servants who follow his every command. And there's the god Ahura Mazda, the Zoroastrian, the god of the Garagabash, main god. You'll see here, this is all text. So this is on the side of a cliff. And there's this huge text. And you see there's text here. This is the Akkadian, the Babylonian version of the text. This text is in 3 languages. Akkadian, Babylonian. It's in Elamite. In fact, the original version is in Elamite, right here, which was chipped away to make room for more captive kings. And then there's the Old Persian version, which is the earliest Persian we have in history. So it's also the earliest Persian text as well. And this text is very important because, as I said, it's the first text where the word Armenia is used to describe Armenia. And just to give you a sense of scale of the thing, here it's on the side of a mountain, so it's not easy to get to. So you can just imagine he had a team of scribes and stone workers who probably couldn't read, so the scribes were probably next to them, like giving them copies of what they had to copy down, of the problem of literacy in the ancient world. You know, they probably had platforms, and they created this massive inscription to glorify Darius and explain to the empire, who is he? Because we still don't know who he is. And this is also just to give scale. So this is a family who's made a nice trip up there, and you can only get there from this little pathway. So it's a little, if you're squeamish, I don't know if you can go up there. But yeah, the text is huge, basically. And there's a detail of the script. So the Behistun inscription is also important because it allowed us to decipher cuneiform script for the first time. So people knew about cuneiform. Europeans knew. They thought that maybe birds had walked on clay, and that's how these texts had been created. So like a bird text, I don't know. But anyway, some very smart Germans and French people were able to, even army corporals who were just on expeditions in the Middle East, such as there was a British officer who was not a historian or anything, but he worked a lot on translating these documents. So basically, the only reason we know anything about the Middle East for 3,000 years is because of the decipherment of this inscription, since it's in 3 languages. And so this gives you a view of the location of the languages. So you have the Babylonian up here on the left, you have the Elamite over here, and you have the Persian way down here. So you'll see the Persian is a lot bigger. And that's because the script that they invented for Persian is very cumbersome. So it has to be a lot longer. And then the old Elamite one is over here, but they destroyed it to make room for this guy with the pointy hat. We'll talk about him later. But anyway, I've mentioned Elamite. The original language of this inscription was in Elamite. And the Elamites lived in Persia, right here. This is the political situation in the mid-2nd millennium BC. So you have the Elam right here at Susa. Today it's called Shush in Farsi. It has the same name. And that's a very old city. That city is perhaps over 5,000, 6,000 years old. The Elamites lived there. And they are not related to Persians. They're not related to Indo-European speaking people. They spoke an isolated language, which might be related to South Indian languages, but that's a debate for another time. Basically, the name of Cyrus, Kurush, might actually be Elamite. So the Persians, the early Persians, might have thought of themselves as successors to these people. Now, their language was dying out at this time, but the Persians still used it for administrative purposes because of they knew the Persians were a new people to the Middle East, but they knew about the antiquity. They knew that Babylon was thousands of years old when they arrived there, so they were very aware of the past of the Middle East, which is really interesting because people prior to them, they tried, but they didn't succeed as well as the Persians did in integrating themselves as masters of the Middle East. This is a nice Elamite tablet. This is from Persepolis. So the only administrative records we have from the Persian Empire are these Elamite tablets. And they describe this massive system of trade and diplomacy, all conducted in a dying language. So it's like if we used Latin for diplomacy and trade and receipts at retail stores. So this is a receipt. They're all basically receipts. Yeah, that's just to give you a view of the linguistic situation in the empire. So back to Bardia. So Herodotus calls Bardia Smerdis. And according to Herodotus, there was a priest, a Zoroastrian priest, a magush. We get the word magic from Zoroastrian, the name of Zoroastrian priest, magician, magic, magical. Smerdis, or in Persian, is called Galmata. Galmata is called by Darius as the magush, the priest. So this priest, named Galmata, allegedly impersonates Bardia. So Cambyses becomes jealous of his brother and has hallucinations that Bardia is going to seize the throne and take control of his empire. So Cambyses kills his brother in the story. How true it is, I don't know. We don't have Cambyses' testimony. He can't defend himself. So Bardia's gone, but there's this priest who, I guess, looks like him, and he's able to fool even Bardia's wife into thinking that this is Bardia. Now that's Darius's propaganda story. So actually Herodotus gives more detail into that. So Herodotus says that Galmata had his ears removed as a sign of devotion or something. It's not really well explained. But then he says that his wife didn't notice that her husband's ears were missing. So while he's sleeping, someone devises a plot for her to examine his head to prove that he's not her husband. And then she sees that he doesn't have ears. And then she yells and screams and realizes that it's an imposter. It's a hard to believe story. That's the version in the Greek history. But it could have arisen from Darius's Persian propaganda. In the Persian version, Darius just says that he fooled everyone, he killed everyone, he killed all of Bardia's friends who would have known that that's not him. And essentially Galmata becomes the most powerful man in the world for a couple months. So that was nice for him. And also, in the text, we have the first Armenian described as such, and his name is Ararat. So of course, I should backtrack a moment. Darius doesn't like that, or he sees an injustice in the fact that the throne was usurped by Galmata here, who's being stepped on. Darius rebels. And in the In Herodotus's version of this political event, Herodotus says that Darius was part of a team, which Darius says as well, and that this team had an argument about what was the correct system of government: democracy, oligarchy, or empire, having a king. And of course, Darius wanted to have a king, and he wanted to be that king. And his associates argued for democracy and oligarchy. How true that is, I don't know, but that's the Greek account. And Darius wins the argument because he says that you can't trust a democracy. People will always vote wrong. They'll vote for someone who speaks well and who manages to fool people with empty promises. So, you know, things haven't changed. So Darius wins this argument, and after killing Gaumata and, I guess, stepping on him, he becomes the most powerful man in the world, the Achaemenid Persian emperor. So I've been using this word Achaemenid, or Hachamanishiya in Old Persian. And this is the dynasty name of the Persian Empire, the Old Persian Empire. However, it's the name that was invented by Darius. There was no record of such a family or dynasty prior to Darius's testimony in this inscription, the Behistun Inscription. So Darius actually goes to Cyrus's tomb after he invents the Old Persian script, and he writes down, "Here lies Cyrus, king of Persia, great king, king of kings, whatever, an Achaemenid king." Now, this is done after Cyrus is dead, so we can't really trust it. In the Cyrus cylinder, so Cyrus's only historical document, he doesn't mention this family at all. He mentions a different ancestor that Darius mentions as well, but it's like a weird cousin-type connection. So essentially, Darius is probably not legitimate, and he probably killed Cyrus's son to be the emperor of Persia. But of course, we don't have any other testimony, and Cyrus, being the most powerful man in the world, was able to get only his narrative across to all the nations under his control, which was, of course, the entire known world at the time, including Greece, which was out of his control. But of course, in the text, we have Ararat the Armenian. So some people think that he's in chains here. It didn't work out for him, but he's there. And Ararat might be related to the word Akka, king. But of course it's unsure. Maybe it's some old Armenian form we don't have. Of course, there's no Armenian testimony about any of this because Armenian script had not been invented, and it will only be invented 1,000 years later. So Ararat rebels against Darius. So when Darius took the throne, let's go back to the map here. There it is. So basically, when Darius seizes the throne, every province rebels. So Darius has this, or basically just this little red part, and then every single province, almost every single province rebels against him. So he's got his little army, or that's how he describes it. I have my little army, and I'm going to beat everyone in my empire in order to take control. So that includes Armenians, of course. And the Armenian Rebel is Ararat, that I showed you right here. And Ararat is weird because he is the last rebel to come about, and he doesn't rebel in Armenia. So basically what happens is Ararat the Armenian goes to Babylon and calls himself Nebuchadnezzar, the son of the last Babylonian king, and he begins a rebellion from there. So that shows that there's some sort of a deep connection, at least with the nobility, between Armenian and Urartian noblemen and Babylonia, or at least he was a good liar, because Darius is very adamant that this guy lied, or he said, Aracha the Armenian, he lied. He went to Babylon and called himself someone he wasn't. Even though Darius is lying probably in the whole text, but that's beside the point. He's very judgmental. And basically, prior to this rebellion, there are descriptions of an Armenian revolt, but in every single account, there are about 20 or so rebellions. And every rebellion starts out by saying, for example, here's the revolt in Elam. This is from the actual text. King Darius says, a certain man named Vahezdata lived in a city called Tarava in Persia. And this man rebelled in Persia, and he told the people that I am Bardia, son of Cyrus. And then I sent out my guy, and he took him out, and now Persia is mine again. So that's the formula that happens over 10 times in this text. However, in the Armenian revolt, this doesn't happen. He doesn't name any rebel. He just says, the Armenians got unruly. And then he says, I sent an Armenian to go kill the Armenians. So this also doesn't happen anywhere else in the text. So Darius has Armenians that are on his side and Armenians that are against him. So as usual, Armenians are divided over who to support, and they're fighting amongst themselves. So he sends an Armenian named Darius I, which is a Persian name, to defeat the Armenians, and he fails. So he sends a Persian to do it, and he wins, apparently. So there are 3 different revolts, and there's no Armenian king ever named. And the other confusing thing about this is that in the Elamite version of the text, it says Harmenuya, which is just Armenian. In the Persian version, it says Armenia, which is Old Persian for Armenian. But in the Babylonian version of the text, it says Urartian. So, of course, we have that debate over who are the Urartians. Their language isn't Armenian, but there seem to be Armenians there at the same time. And then, of course, in this text, the person who's called an Urartian is also called an Armenian in the same text, just in a different language translation. So what does that mean? Well, we don't know, because there's no etymology for Armenian, so we can't really say one way or the other exactly what that means. But we know that this is the first time the word Armenian is used, and it's used to describe the people in this revolt. And, oh, this is a nice detail of Ahura Mazda. So you'll see this is a very Assyrian style god depiction. And he's granting wisdom and glory, the empire, to Darius. And of course we have this nice map again. So basically, Armenia rebels the most of all the Persian provinces. It rebels 3 times with no king, apparently, and then it rebels that 4th time, taking control of Babylon with that guy named Ararat. The other funny thing about Ararat, or Arka, I guess, so his name would just be king, is that his father is also named Haldita. Now, Haldi is the major god of the Urartians, so before Armenia. Haldi was the major god of the Urartians. So this first Armenian, whose name seems to be Armenian, is the son of someone with an Urartian name, who is again described as both an Urartian and as an Armenian. So there's absolutely no clarification there, such as Armenian history prior to the invention of Armenian. And then, basically, at the end of this text, of which we have very specific dates, that's why we know that Darius came to power in October, or September of 522 BC, because he gives exact dates of everything that happens, but he doesn't give them in order. So as you're reading the text, there's some things that happen beforehand, and some things that happen afterwards, which just confuses it even more. But anyway, clarity was not his goal. His goal was to prove that he was the righteous king of the world, basically. So, the end of this text is very important for Armenian history as well, because the last paragraph of the text says, King Darius says, "By the glory of Ahura Mazda, this is the text which I have made," as if we would think it's something else. It was in Aryan script, so of course his word for the language was Aryan, or Aryan, just means Iranian. And it was composed on clay tablets and parchment, and besides that, I made a sculptured figure of myself, so he's very humble. And besides that, I named my family. And then afterwards, this inscription I sent off everywhere amongst all my provinces, and the people unitedly worked on it. So what does that mean? That means that there are versions, allegedly, in every language spoken in this empire. And of course, there are a lot of languages in this empire. That's why they conducted business in a dead language, because then they wouldn't have to get confused over vernacular. So there's tons of languages over here. We don't even know anything about these people, except they have pointy hats, like that guy on the end. And, you know, apparently he sent a version of this text to Armenia as well, to prove that he's the legitimate king. However, we don't have a copy in Armenian, of course, or Urartian, for that matter. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, because remember I told you about the Elamite tablets before that came from Persepolis, the capital down here. And there are over 10,000 tablets, all about receipts, doing business, letters, reports to the king, things like that. How much food the king wants for dinner, stuff like that. And, you know, there were undoubtedly other archives like these. So thousands and thousands of tablets that are completely undiscovered. In Afghanistan recently, they discovered a tablet about this big. This big. You can barely see it. And on it, it has one phrase in Elamite, in the Persian style, which means that in Afghanistan, out here, called the Sogdiana in Old Persian, or Suguda, there was an archive of probably tens of thousands of tablets. But all we have is that tiny piece. If you can't see my fingers, that's okay, that's the idea. In Babylon, we actually have a piece of Darius's head from a copy of the sculpture on the inscription. So essentially, there are copies out there that will provide answers for what's going on in Armenia, because it'll have the local language. Armenian, Urartian, that would of course be a major discovery. But of course we don't know. But anyway, moving on. So after Darius is Xerxes, our favorite Persian king in America, because he's the star of 300, basically. And Xerxes, of course, is famous for invading Greece and fighting the Spartans and being crazy, even though that's probably not true. He was fairly level-headed. His name is Hayasa in Persian. That's a mouthful. Even for the ancients, that was a mouthful. That's why the Greeks call him Xerxes. So anyway, you'll see Xerxes takes part of Greece and part of Europe, but he just kind of maintains the empire and stays the king of kings, the most powerful man in the world. And of course, this is Xerxes in the movie 300 as we know him today. So it's very historically accurate, especially with the speedo he's wearing. It's very. I honestly have no idea where they got this from. No idea at all. But this is actually him. So nice. He has beard, hair, a hat. He's wearing clothes, and he has his associates here holding a parasol above him to protect the all-powerful king from the sun. So even the most powerful man in the world needed sun protection. And that's from his palace at Persepolis. You can go see it sometime. It's nice. I haven't seen it. And Xerxes continued to make texts, though he doesn't clarify at all any of the mysteries about Darius because he was Darius' son. So why would he want to say bad things about his dad? That's just the way it was. So here again, this is an inscription in Armenia. This is the only Achaemenid period inscription outside of Persia. And they chose to make it in Armenia. Now, I have a translation of this text here that I made from the Elamite. You can see how the Elamite looks. It's very strange. No, you can't see. Very strange. Yes? Oh, okay, it's back. Okay, so you can see the Elamite there. It's very strange. So like for Ahura Mazda, they say Ura Mazda. They can't pronounce anything Persian. For Xerxes, actually, because they can't say ch at the beginning of a word, or k either, they say, where is it? Well, they say ik shersha. So pronunciation problems are nothing new to the world. In fact, Persian doesn't have an L, so they call Babylon Babiru. They can't do L. So they would have sang that Christmas song, Fararara. They just didn't have an L. So here, this is the only text outside of Persia, and it's in Armenia, in Old Persian. And unfortunately, it happens to also be the most dull text, because the only original part of it says, my father Darius, by the glory of Ura Mazda, made much good. This place he ordered to be dug out of the wall, in which he did not write an inscription. Then I ordered the inscription to be written, and that's the whole thing. So his text in Armenia just says, I wrote this text, which is monumentally unhelpful in terms of reconstructing anything. But that's our friend Darius. Xerxes. And yeah, that's his Van inscription. So clearly, they considered Armenia to be a very important province since Xerxes and Darius chose to make this text in Van. You can see it if you ever travel to Western Armenia, Eastern Turkey. It's right on Van Castle. It's on the cliff. It's very large. And it's in the Old Persian. Oh, you can't see my cursor anymore. Oh well. But anyway, the left side has the Old Persian. The middle one has Elamite, and the right side has the Babylonian. So again, it's in 3 languages. But of course, all empires fall, and the Persians fell to Alexander the Great, and then Alexander fell to a cold in Babylon. And then, of course, as Greeks are wont to do, they fought amongst themselves and divided Alexander's stuff into many pieces. And Armenia was not one of them. Armenia became independent. So the governors of Armenia, we know them as Yervanduni. We know that they were Yervanduni because Movses Khorenatsi somehow knew about these kings. He knew their names, but he didn't know that much about them. And unfortunately, in terms of texts from the Yervanduni that describe how they were governors and how they became the first Armenian kings to call themselves Armenian. We don't have many texts because they seem to have forgotten how to write. The Urartians wrote great texts at Ebony. You can see them in Urartian, in Babylonian. They wrote multilingual texts, bilingual texts. But after the Urartians fell, the Armenians afterwards didn't seem to write anything for some reason, or at least we haven't found it yet. And that's why we don't know much about the first Armenian kingdom, the Yervanduni. They're called the Orontans in Greek. And however, they didn't know the Greek language because the Seleucids right here, the Seleucid Empire, which was the largest empire created following Alexander's death by his general Seleucus. They're famous in the Bible. The Bible doesn't like them either. Antiochus, the king. Armenia declares its independence, but we do have maybe one or two texts from them, and I went to go find it. Nobody knew what I was talking about. I was in Yerevan, and I went to huge service. I went to people who could drive me out there, taxi drivers. I said, I'm looking for King Yerevan's Greek royal inscription. And they said, Chenki Monu, which is fortunately, I was able to get someone to drive me out there to Armavir on the border. It's very hot there. It's like 120. So we're at if you go looking for this. And a local Yazidi Kurdish farmer was with his cows near the cemetery of the village, the Armavir cemetery. And I asked this man, I said, do you know where King Yerevan's inscription is? I've asked everyone all day, nobody knows what I'm talking about. And there's only one publication of this in Russian, and I can't find it. So on top of it being in Russian, I can't find it. So he said, I know what you're talking about. And he took me to this boulder. So this boulder is sitting in the middle of the modern cemetery of the village on Lavie. And on this boulder, or there's a couple of boulders, is a pretty, is that working? Yes. Is a pretty not well done, I don't know if you can see it, Greek inscription by Yerevan the king, Yerevan III, I think maybe end of the 3rd century. Again, we don't know much about these people. You can see the word Dios written there. I believe that's a delta. Yeah. So anyway, I mean, this looks like, it's kind of like a scribble compared to what the cuneiform kings had used before. But I guess this must have been in the center of his capital, Armavir, which probably had forts, walls, a garrison. And you know, in the area, there's nothing now. There's just the center, there's a couple of tombstones, and there's the Urartian fort called Biainili on the hill next to these boulders. And so when I was talking about the ruins of Armavir, the old Armenian capital, the first capital of Armenia, if you don't count the Urartian one at Van, there's still a lot of work to be done to preserve this area and really give us a perspective on what's going on here, what this family was all about. But according to their testimony, they very much tried to present themselves as successors to the Persians, who had been the most powerful people they had ever seen. And of course, the Persians had given them Armenia to be governors of. They were, the Yerevan says he was from the Afghanistan region, Bactria. So he was at least half Bactrian. But other than this text, which doesn't say much other than he made his brother the priest at the temple of the sun and the moon, we don't have any other text from him. And of course, Artaxerxes usurps the throne from Yerevan, probably this one actually, So it doesn't end well for this Yerevant. And we get subsequent Armenian kings we know much more about, but unfortunately the kings who presided over the genesis of the Armenian kingdom as a political entity, this is what I've told you is pretty much everything we know about them. So, yeah. I'm happy to take questions now. This is the Yerevanli kingdom, the first Armenian kingdom that declared independence from the Akkadian Empire when the Achaemenids were destroyed by Alexander. So, yeah, if anyone has questions, I'm happy to take them.
Why don't you talk about the King Tigran? You went all the way
Tigran.
Yeah.
So I gave a lecture on Tigran, was it a couple of years ago, last year? And of course, Tigran reigned in the middle of the 1st century BC, so he's after this.
Right. Can you speak a little bit about that? Because he was occupied all the Middle East.
Tigran, he conquered Syria and parts of Mesopotamia and down to Israel. But of course, he presents himself as a king of kings, just like the Persians did. So he's his family, the Ardashesians, were pretty much they tried to tie themselves to King Yerevant's family from the Persian period. So in the texts we have from this family, we know that they try to present themselves as successors to the Persian kings of kings, so that they could be. And Tigran, of course, tried to realize that goal of recreating the Persian Empire under Armenian control. So he conquered Syria in, I want to say the 70s BC, and of course he ran into the Roman sledgehammer. But yeah, I did give a talk on Tigran last year, but if you send me a message, I'll get back to you on
that. You mentioned You mentioned that the Persians were not from the Middle East, but you didn't say where they came from.
Oh, that's a good question. Where the Persians came from. So we just talked about where the Armenians came from. The answer was pretty much vague. So where did the Persians come from? The answer to that is also vague. The answer is probably from Afghanistan. So we know linguistically that Persian and Hindi, Sanskrit, were one language at one point. So it's called the Indo-Iranian language group. And so that period was probably about 2000 BC, 2500 BC. These people are one, and they have the same religion probably. Because of course, Ahura Mazda in Old Persian means the wise Lord. Mazda is the same word as wisdom in English, or the car. And Ahura means Lord in Persian. Asura means probably Lord, or actually it means demon in Sanskrit. So what happened was there was probably some sort of split in the prehistoric groups of people in the religion as well, because in Persian religion, the Ahuras become the good gods. Ahura Mazda becomes the god, the good god. But in Indian religions, the Asuras become the demons, the bad gods. And in fact, in Indian religion, the Daivas, the devil, related to the English word devil, or also the Latin word deus, God. So there's confusion here about meanings between God and demon. The Daivas are good in Indian religion, or Hindu religion. And in Persian religion, the Daivas are bad. They're very bad, like devils. In fact, Xerxes has a text where he destroys demon worshippers somewhere that he doesn't specify, again, being unhelpful. So where did the Persians come from? The Persians came from this prehistoric split between Indian, what would become Indian and Persian groups of people, Iranian groups of people. So at some point the Iranians and the Indians split, maybe in 2000 BC. But at one point they were one people who spoke the same language. Does that answer your question? Geographically, somewhere in Afghanistan.
It's not known. This relates to the question to the origin of Indo-Europeans. Still there are several theories. It's not known. Who answered to that question?
Well, I mean, where they came from, like, way, way back, of course, we don't know. But when, like, the Persians split and become their own group of people, that's probably 2000 or so. They split in Afghanistan or so, yeah. Okay, so his question was on the connection of DNA evidence in broad movements of people. I look at texts. I work with historical texts and religious texts, and I can say I have not looked at DNA evidence in regards to this. So purely from a historical point of view, in terms of talking about the origins of Armenia, that's mainly what my focus was with the presentation. And in terms of connecting that, like names and things like that, to DNA evidence is a little outside the scope of the profession, I think. Or I don't know. National Geographic knows. They do DNA testing. That sort of thing. And there's a lot of articles online about it, actually, that are just coming out.
Is Araka could be the word of Armenian of Arach or Arachina or Aracha?
Arach.
The first.
Well,
Archbishop like Arach, Archbishop or Arach.
Like Archbishop? Oh, the first. Well, I believe that the word Arach, which is a verb now, like Harach or Arach, it originally had a H in front of it. That's actually funny because in the Elamite version, his name is Haraka. But in Elamite, the H is not pronounced. So it's still Araka or Aracha. So the answer to that question is maybe. There's an article in German in the Armenian Journal of Linguistics by Rudiger Schmidt. I believe it's from the 80s or 90s. Rudiger Schmidt is a big expert on Persian and Armenian, Indo-European languages in general. And if there's an answer, it'll be in that article. But there's no definite answer to the origin of Aracha. It might be Arka. I don't know.
That boulder that you found in the cemetery,
Yes.
did you tell the Armenian authorities, are they protected?
Oh, they know about it. The only thing is that I have told groups about it. Like I mentioned it to people I know in Chicago about that inscription, that I found it. I know a few years ago, the Kurds, they told me that an Australian had come to take pictures of it and clean it up. I don't know who it is though, they didn't remember her name. But that is one of my goals. I will probably be in Armenia this summer, or a few months after that. And that's one thing I'd like to do. That was in fact the last day I was there in Armenia. So I couldn't really do anything about it. But it's pretty well guarded. It's in the middle of the cemetery, so no one's gonna abscond with the boulder or anything. It's not in a dangerous position, I'd say. It's pretty safe.
My question is, more, is it going to be enclosed some kind of protected area so that everybody recognized as some kind of an ancient historical fact?
Right, so is it going to be protected? I certainly hope so. I'm going to definitely talk to people about what I found or what I refound, because it was known before. So maybe it could even be republished in English with nice photographs, and it can be cleaned up. Because there was a lot of moss and things on it, but I certainly hope so. At the moment, it's not.
Do you think that claims that Turks are successors of Medians credible?
No, the claims of Turks are not credible. Kurds, no, the claims of Kurds are not credible, that they're successors of Medians. The Kurds, there was a province that was called Korbuk in Armenia, so the Kurds probably come from that area. The thing about Medians is that first we don't know anything about them, so we don't know who can claim what from anyone in regards to Medians. So even if it were true, there would be no evidence to support that. Basically, there's a city in Iran called Ekbatana in Greek, and they have to excavate deeper there because that was the Median capital. If they excavate deep enough, I think they'll find some sort of records from the Medians, and that could answer some questions. But even if the Kurds were successors to the Medians, no one's going to honor Median claims to empire anymore. I highly doubt that. But genetically, of course, they're both Iranian. The Medians were not Persian. The Medians were Iranian, but they were not Persian. So they spoke a slightly different dialect.
Like Kaddish?
Well, we don't know anything about Median. All we know about Median is that there's a particular consonant in Persian. So I will show you. There's a consonant in Persian. No, sorry. So here's the Old Persian version of the text. It's gone. Well, whatever. But there's a consonant in Persian that's written as a C with a little tail under it. In fact, I'll write it out here so that you see what I'm talking about.
Excuse me.
Yes?
I was born in Hamadan, and that's the best place that we can get because it's the oldest capital of Iran. And then we can find all your information going there, and there's a lot of things that you can go and find out about it.
Yes, so Ekbatana's modern name is Hamadan.
Yes.
And that was the Median capital. So once they do more digs into the deeper levels, first of all, we'll know more about the Parthians, who are mentioned. Of course, Parthians are important for Armenians because King Davud is Parthian, St. Gregory is Parthian. A lot of Armenians are Parthian. So that would be important. And then the Medians before them. So yeah, Hamadan, it's going to be very important. So there's a Persian consonant in Old Persian that's written in English letters like this. And we write it that way because we don't know what it is. It's probably pronounced S. But in Median, when they do the names of Medians, where this consonant would appear, they pronounce it as Th. So Theta R. So that would be the equivalent of the Median Iranian. Let me get the Greek up here. Yeah, so that would be the equivalent of Th in Median. So that's the only thing we know about Median, is that the Medians say Th and the Old Persians say S for the same consonant. And that our knowledge of Median ends there.
In the beginning, we learned that you went to Armenian school here in KCB.
Yes.
So is that where you got your foundation right from there? Started from Armenian school?
A grant?
No, I said you got your basic.
Oh, yes, yes.
So aren't you glad that you went to the school right there?
Right, so
your basic foundation started from the Armenian school. Is that
right. So the reason I got interested in all of this was because we had to take Hayasa and KZB, and you know the most. And I had it. The lesson about this period where I had with Baron Khachaluyan. Yeah, you probably know him. And he, basically that lecture I still remember because I was very interested in, you know, the Akkadian kings he was talking about from the mid-3rd millennium BC, and the Persians, the Urartians, everything. So yes, I can probably say it's because of KZB that I decided to do all of this, and yeah.
A few times during the talk, you mentioned that we don't have much in Armenian because Armenian alphabet didn't exist. Is there any evidence of Armenian languages written in other
scripts? Yeah. Like I said, Darius in the last paragraph of the text says he sent out the text everywhere worked hard to translate it, and so there's anecdotal evidence that written Armenian exists. But in terms of hard evidence, I know there's some discussion about Hayasian alphabet, you know, things that Mesrop Mashtos would have looked at to create the Armenian alphabet as we know it. But in terms of like massive texts that are well understood and known, no. And Armenian words written in other languages, Aracha, maybe, might be Arka. Other than that, I don't know of any Armenian word attested. But it is funny because a lot of the Persian in the Behistun inscription is preserved in Armenian, but not in Farsi. Armenian probably preserves more Persian than Farsi does, in terms of vocabulary. Like, actually, I'll give an example. Darius calls his commanders Framantar. So the root of that is Framan, which is, of course, the Armenian Haraman command. And actually the word in Old Persian for blue is Kapautaka, which is like Gabudak, or Gabu in Armenian. So there's Persian words that are preserved in Armenian, but they're not writing Armenian words in Persian.
Well, let's take one more question.
So the stories of things like I come through, like Nikon Yermantian being friends with Buros and like Ashkalan and Berbesa. But what's the deal with that, like old Yermantian dynasty with like the advent of the Armenian Empire? Like which was part of Armenia ruled by those Yermantians, or were they considered satraps, or?
So that's a good point. There is a text. So remember I mentioned there's no historical text from Cyrus besides the Cyrus cylinder or anything that really like is reliable from him. There is a biography of Cyrus written in Greek by the Greek historian Xenophon. Of course, he's writing generations later. And the Greeks, of course, everyone loved Cyrus, like I said at the beginning. Everyone loved Cyrus, including the Greeks, including the historian Xenophon, also a politician. So Xenophon wrote a book called the Cyropedia, where you can find anything you ever wanted to know about Cyrus. And in the Cyropedia, there is a discussion of Cyrus's childhood, where he's friends with a man named Tigran Yerbanduni. So this is obviously a reference to, well, actually he's called Tigran in the text. I don't know if he's explicitly called Urartu. In Khorenatsi's account, there is a Tigran Yerbanduni who reigned in this period. But Khorenatsi gets confused between that Dikran and Dikran Meds and other Dikrans. So, I mean, there's about 10 Dikrans running around at one point or another in Armenian history, so Khorenatsi gets confused. But in Xenophon's account, Dikran helps Cyrus, become the king he is. Basically, he's a childhood friend of his. And how reliable Xenophon's account is, I don't know. There's a lot of details that he couldn't possibly have known. But the fact that there's a Dikran mentioned in Xenophon's account of Cyrus's youth, and there's also a Dikran mentioned by Khorenatsi for the same period, probably means that there was a Dikran. Of course, Dikran is a Persian name. It means points, arrows. Dikran means arrows. He probably existed, but exactly what his relationship with Cyrus is hard to say because of the nature of Xenophon's text, which was basically more about being a manual for being a good political leader rather than an actual biography of Cyrus, even though that's how it's framed, if you get what I mean.
Thanks very much for this wonderful presentation, Michelle.
Well, it's not a question. I'm very proud of you as your former teacher, of course. But I wanted to mention that you said you wanted to go to Armenia this summer. And I would like you to, definitely, I'm going to be there too. I would like you to meet with Professor Urartian, who's doing the summer course on the Ebony Urartu archaeological tours. He has students and he has a summer course exploring the ruins of the Urartu kingdom. But I think he would be a wonderful resource for you to meet and work with him. This is fantastic, and the more power to you. We're very proud of you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We're all very proud of you, Nishan, and we look forward to your next presentation. We're going to have to send you to Afghanistan to do some research, but don't worry. Anyway, that's why I was and thank you all for coming today. God bless.
Yeah, I think we are.